welcome everyone. I'll move on to my slides. So hopefully there'll be no technical problems. Okay, so just right. Right, how's that look? Good?
Brilliant, looks great, yeah.
Okay, so it's sort of a mixed bag, the presentation, but just giving you an idea of what's happening in the electric vehicle scene, how we're progressing compared to other countries. All right, so right, so what I'm going to talk about is, why the focus of electric vehicles. How do we transition? What is our progress? What's the impact of having no regulatory standards in Australia? What BEVs are available in Australia and what progress is there for forthcoming EVs? Who are the buyers of our electric vehicles, which are consumers? And then we're going to then move on to, well, let's give up on consumers and let's look at business buyers. And this sort of led to our project proposal that was accepted by the program called Reliable, Affordable, Clean Energy, or abbreviated as RACE, for 2030. So, which was very excited about, and that was we got the signed off on the contract only about 3 weeks ago. So let's start. Why electric vehicles? Now, when we talk about electric vehicles, there are actually three categories. We've got the hybrid electric vehicle, and that's the Priuses. Now, this is included in our net zero emissions by 2050. The electric vehicles where there's going to be net zero emissions is your full battery electric vehicles, not HEVs, nor will it be your plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. They only have a kilometre range of roughly on battery of 50 to 80 kilometres, and then after you've travelled 50, 80 kilometres, then the combustion fuel engine kicks in. So it's a transition to full battery electric vehicles. Okay, so we need to transition to full battery electric vehicles in order to get this our transport emissions down, because road vehicles, the ones we're talking about, account for about 65% of transport emissions, and overall nationally that makes up, it's edging up to 19% of the nation's emissions. So in order to bring that to zero, we have to transition to full battery electric vehicles, that for the road transport. How do we do that? Well, the literature, when we look at countries, how they're performing, we can see that is a combination of policy, and what they brought it down to supply measures, and that's the supply of battery electric vehicles from your car manufacturers. So we need supply side measures, and in order to encourage consumers or encourage people to buy these vehicles, we need to have demand side measures. So we've gone back to supply measures. They are to encourage, or let's say not encourage, to make our car manufacturers manufacture battery electric vehicles. Then we have what we call regulations. Regulations which are based on the supply or sale of vehicles based on CO2 emissions. By making these regulatory measures or mandatory measures impose penalties on car manufacturers who do not meet these targets. So, for example, we'll look at the targets in a moment. So, for example, at the moment, the European Union imposes 95 euros, or equivalent to $149 per gram of CO2 per kilometre that's exceeded the target, right? So it's per gram. That's not much at all. And then there are super credits. The more you manufacture full battery electric vehicles, the more super credits that you're entitled to. So it's all to do with making car manufacturers produce and sell battery electric vehicles. Now, with these penalties, for example, Volkswagen was fined in 2020 for missing the target 157 million. Right, so where these targets are enforced, they are legislated, and that any car manufacturers in European Union, these are the penalties that are imposed. And then in order to support car manufacturers, countries are now actually coming out openly going to ban the sale of combustion fuel vehicles, right? So and they're bringing the date they're banning the sale of combustion fuel vehicles forward. So in Norway, they're going to ban them by 2025. There'll be no combustion fuel vehicles sold at all. In the UK, they've brought that forward from 2035 to 2030, and you've got your other countries still sitting at 2035. So they're banning the sale completely. Okay, so that's the sale, that's the supply of battery electric vehicles. That's to get them to be manufactured and sold by car manufacturers. And then on the other side of the equation are your demand side measures, measures imposed on consumers and business in order to encourage us to buy these battery electric vehicles. So it's one thing is to supply them. The other side of the equation is to get us to buy them. And that's where we have these financial measures, which are pretty much mostly tax focused, vehicle purchase taxes. Then we've got subsidies, grants, exemption, exempting GST, VAT, or exempting road tax. And there are plenty of others they bring in. They even have special taxes on NOx, even on specific emissions as well, all to do with discouraging certain types of vehicles, of people buying certain types of vehicles. They also have introduced non-financial measures, and we can see that with the state governments are bringing those in. That's like free charging. There'll be a year where you can go down the road to a charging infrastructure and it's free charging. Driving in the bus lane on the highways, getting to work early, and then obviously showcasing your lovely battery electric vehicles to everyone else who's queued up on the roads. And then we've got things like free tolls and so forth. Okay, so in terms of so when we bring it all together, the supply and the demand side measures, and we see, well, how is it panning out? And that's where we talk about they measure that by looking at the total sales of all vehicles sold in the country, and then they work out the average CO2, the average grams of CO2 per kilometre. The average, so in 2019, 2020 figures are not out for yet to see how we're going. But in Europe, we've got 123 grams of CO2. Noting that we've got now phasing in new targets from 2020 to 2024. That's got to come by the end of 2024, it's going to come down to 95 grams of CO2 per kilometre. That's for the European Union. And now that, as I said, it's a combination of supply, the regulatory measures, which is that the pressure will be on the car manufacturers to manufacture these vehicles with low, and that basically is to achieve that target. You can only achieve it by increasing the number of full battery electric vehicles that you sell. By 2030, there's another reduction of 37%. So, and that should come down, average out to 59 grams of CO2 per kilometre for when you look at the total sales of all vehicles sold in that country. It has to come down to 59. And by 2050, that will be zero. So it's a transition and a progression. And as you can see, and now look at Norway. Norway has already achieved the 2030 target already at 59. They're already high up, and that's why say that they're the leaders of battery electric vehicles. and they also have they're banning the sales of combustion vehicles by 2025, and it looks that they're going to achieve that. And so these are the targets. This is what they've achieved. Now in Australia, us down the bottom, we're at 180.5 grams of CO2 per kilometre. We are called the laggards of the OECD. We are at the bottom. That just demonstrates to you what happens when you have no policy at all. No policy at all, it will just remain at that level. And that's why there's going to be pressure on Australia to do something to improve that. And that means regulation and policy. Now, car manufacturers, there apparently are going to be 200 new battery electric vehicles coming into the market in between this time period, and they're saying, predicting that by the beginning of 2026, a third of all the sales of vehicles in the European will be, now I should be saying, full battery electric vehicles. Moving on to the next slide. Okay, we've got, right, so this is just quickly the progress, supply and demand, those measures, and you can see that there's now been this huge jump, huge uptake of battery electric vehicles in the European Union and Norway. Now, Norway, everyone says, oh, it's such a tiny little country. Okay, yes, it is. It's got a population of 5.3 million people. But do you know that in June of 2019, they sold just in 1 month, 7,587 EVs, of which 5,000 were battery electric vehicles. Coming down to Australia at the bottom, our uptake is 0.7 in 2020. It's an increase from 0.6. We went to 6,900 vehicles for the whole year, right? And half of those vehicles are Teslas. So all right. So they're doing. That's where we are. Not doing well at all.
5 minutes.
Sorry.
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay. So the problem is that the problem in Australia is our price gap is without regulation, and you've probably heard they talk about dumping these combustion vehicles in Australia. Now that is a real major problem. And when we talk about a price premium, the price premium, say for example, the Kona, anyone buying a Kona vehicle in Australia, you go into your dealer, you're looking at 66,000 versus a combustion fuel vehicle for the same vehicle at cheaper by 23,600. If I want to look at this vehicle in that category, the best in sales is this Mitsubishi ASX petrol, and it's $32,000 cheaper. Now, that's a huge price difference. So when they talk about the price gap, it's huge. And can we have any policy measures to narrow that gap? That gap is too wide. So even when you would have heard Victoria has introduced a rebate of $3,000 for the first 4,000 vehicles sold, New South Wales, similar, a $3,000 rebate, it's not enough to reduce that gap. Now, now what's happened is because of the no regulation, car manufacturers, for example, Volkswagen, are simply saying we are not bringing these cheaper electric vehicles to the country because you have no regulation. You are hostile to electric vehicles. You are a third world for electric vehicles. So we are not going to get the cheaper range of electric vehicles. These are the cheaper range of electric vehicles currently available in the UK. All right, so we do have some cheaper vehicles, but all our EVs that we have in this country are all high end. which can only be afforded by what we call early adopters of electric vehicles. So all that 6,600 people, we've talked about buying your electric vehicles, they are called early adopters of electric vehicles, where they are prepared to pay that price premium. I did a survey last year in 2020 of people who bought electric vehicles in Queensland. The statistics were interesting because 83% were male. We dissected it between Tesla and non-Tesla statistics, and the top reason why they bought the battery electric vehicles was because of emissions. So they are buying these vehicles because they believe it's the right thing to do and they want to reduce the CO2 emissions. But all of these, all the early adopters are high income earners, and they're all you've got to be a high end income earner to be able to afford these vehicles. I'll just move it along. I'm just about finished. Well, I'll have to finish. Okay, so you've got three groups. You've got early adopters, you then have mainstream, that's everyone, and then you have laggards who will not buy a battery electric vehicle. Doesn't really matter. They don't want one. They want the combustion fuel vehicle. So the main group that we need to buy battery electric vehicles are called your mainstream. They're surveyed every year by Electric Vehicle Council and the RACQ, RACV, and the questionnaire goes out every year. Are you interested in buying an electric vehicle? We see that the percentages or the number of people wanting to buy an electric vehicle is increasing, but they all come back and they say they are unwilling to pay the price premium. And the price premium, I gave you an example, was $23,000 or $32,000. Now that's that vehicles. You've got to remember, in the European Union, those vehicles would not be available for sale. Okay, so we're not going to be able to. The problem that Australia has, mainstream adopters, mainstream group of consumers will not buy a battery electric vehicle with such a huge price premium if the government does not bring in supply and supply measures or demand side measures.
Anna, you have 1 minute.
Okay, 1 minute. So well, that brought us to business. Why not go and look at business? So this is what we did. We then presented a project to our race for 2030, and we also had to present it to the industry partners, and we approached the state governments, and they have all come on board and they have supported this project that Mary Keys announced at the beginning. And our project, together with Diane Corral of Monash University, is business fleets and BEVs, taxation changes to support home charging from the grid. So we're going to use our fleet employees to charge business fleet vehicles from home. And we are also going to address affordability through taxation changes. So that the Australian government has part of RACE is the federal government and industry partners, and to be on board with the project, which they are, which we're very, very excited for that this has happened, and hopefully we'll be able to report on it in the next time we come to either ADA or in the Queensland Tax Research Symposium. Thank you very much.